All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Fair Housing Ambassador Program. We're going to get started now. If everyone could stay muted during today's presentation, that'll help our presenters quite a bit. We have a chat box. If you would like to ask any questions, please utilize the chat box. We will also have dedicated Q&A time throughout the presentation, where you'll be invited to unmute if you have any questions. But throughout the presentation, again, feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions. We are so excited to host you all for this opportunity through the City of Houston's Housing and Community Development Department. We are excited to teach you through this free training series about fair housing, community outreach, and how to build a winning strategy for an application to become a fair housing ambassador with our program. And on one last quick note is that today's presentation is being recorded and it will be available on the City of Houston's website after today's presentation for future reference. Through our 3 training sessions and an opportunity to meet with expert marketing consultants for free group or one-on-one coaching, we hope that you will feel confident in submitting an application to become a funded or volunteer Fair Housing Ambassador with our program. We hope that you will feel confident to educate your own communities and teach them about fair housing for the betterment of your neighborhoods. Whether you plan to apply to be a funded or volunteer Fair Housing Ambassador, by participating in this training series, you will gain many added benefits to better serve your community, including learning how to talk about fair housing, learning how to identify and report housing discrimination, learning how to identify and define target audiences, learning new ways to conduct community outreach, learning how to craft a winning proposal for funding, learning how to measure success of your community outreach and report. Today's training session will begin with some quick introductions, and the City of Houston's Housing and Community Development Department staff will do a presentation on the basics of fair housing. Then we will dive into the 7 steps for successful community outreach, including identifying your target community and developing a strong and persuasive message. You can download a complimentary digital training packet to accompany today's training session at the tiny URL link on the screen. One of our staff members is also sharing this link in the chat for your quick access so you can follow along. My name is Michaela and I'm a marketing expert with Taylor Collective Solutions, or TCS. We are a boutique PR and marketing firm in Austin, Texas, and we have been conducting nationwide and statewide community outreach campaigns since 2005. We have staff in Houston, Dallas, and Austin, and have been headquartered in Austin. Our firm, again, has statewide and national experience in planning and executing successful community outreach campaigns. Community outreach is our specialty. My apologies, my slides have frozen, but I'll still talk a bit more about our community outreach experience. We have done work such as planning nationwide and local press events. We've planned marches such as the Million Moms March in Washington, D.C., and the Texas Women's March in 2017 and 2021. We have trained community leaders how to go into their own communities and talk to residents about important causes. We have created digital and social media campaigns, millions of impressions. We've coordinated earned and free media coverage to increase visibility of important causes. And we've also planned strategic media buying in magazines, newspapers, TV, radio, you name it, we've done it. So now that I've introduced myself and TCS, I would love to get to know everyone that's joining us today. If you could jump on the chat and tell us a bit about yourself, your name, if you're representing an organization or a nonprofit, what community you live or serve in, and what you love about Houston. So if everyone could take a moment, and please stay muted. I've got eyes on the chat and I'd love to read off some of your responses. So whichever neighborhood or community you serve and represent in Houston, please drop your name and your organization in the chat so we can get to know one another. Hi, Tammy with the Women's Home in Houston. We have Andrea, who serves the entire Houston-Galveston region, joining us today. The founder of TCS, Kim Taylor, is joining us today. Regina with the Houston Housing Authority is joining us today. Wow, I am seeing a ton of engagement in the chat. Everyone definitely read the chat and see who's joining us today. You might see someone in an organization you're familiar with, or someone joining who lives or serves in the same community as you that you could potentially network with. See Inner Loop represented, Third Ward. Awesome. Thank you everyone for participating. I'm excited to introduce our next presenter, Kimmy Johnson, the Fair Housing Education and Community Engagement Coordinator. Take it away, Kimmy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimmy Johnson, and I work for the Housing and Community Development Department as the Fair Housing Education and Outreach Coordinator. And I am joined today by my colleague on the Fair Housing team, Megan Rowe. She's our Fair Housing Analyst, and she's going to be covering the Fair Housing portion of the presentation today. So as we go through this presentation, please know that you can ask questions at any time. You can do so by typing in the Q&A box provided at the top of your screen if you're joining on the Teams app. And during this workshop, we're going to be giving a brief overview of what an ambassador is, a review of the basics of fair housing and the protected classes under the Federal Fair Housing Act. And then we're going to cover 3 types of housing discrimination. And lastly, we're going to address any questions that may have been posted in the Q&A section. But before we begin, please just take a moment to answer this question by placing your response in the chat. So on a scale of 1 to 5, we want you to tell us how well do you understand your basic fair housing rights and can teach others about their fair housing rights. So 1 being, I do not know how my basic fair housing rights and cannot teach others. 3 being, I sort of know my basic fair housing rights, but I would struggle to teach others. And 5, I am confident of my knowledge of my basic fair housing rights and can teach others. So those are starting to come in through the chat. Okay. See some 3s, some 4s. Awesome. Okay, some 1s. That's okay. We're all going to learn today. Some 3s, some 5s. Okay. Right. Awesome. Thank you. And you can feel free to continue to pop those in. So let's begin with what our goals for the ambassador program are. And our team has designed this program specifically to increase fair housing knowledge throughout the city with the help of local organizations through targeted outreach and education led by trusted sources in the community. And that's you guys. So we know that a significant portion of Houston residents are not aware of their fair housing rights, but there's just no way that our office can effectively reach everyone in the city who needs fair housing assistance. So we need help. Ambassadors who know their communities, who know their cultures and habits of the people in them, and know how to best reach those individuals with information in a way that's accessible and welcomed. So we often rely on community partners to provide their communities with education and information about fair housing issues, targeting in particular those most at risk of experiencing housing discrimination, including low and moderate income people, people with disabilities, households with children, and people with limited English proficiency. And so we want to formalize this partnership with the Fair Housing Ambassador Program so we can better recognize and support the work that's being done in the community. But we feel strongly about supporting our ambassadors as best we can to be successful in their work. Next slide, please. That's why the series of trainings have been designed to build organizational capacity to apply for funding, to meet program requirements, and successfully implement fair housing outreach program. And so we hope that what you learn here would not only help you apply for this program, but also other funding opportunities here at the city and elsewhere in the future. And also, our formalized ambassador program will help us recognize fair housing ambassadors and the work that they're doing in their communities through the formalized program. And we do have a small funding source available to carry out some of the outreach activities, but we understand that this is a very limited amount of funding. But we do hope that what you learn here and the connections that you're going to make will not only help you apply for our program, but other funding opportunities through the cities and elsewhere. So at this time, I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Megan. Megan?
Thank you, Kimmy. As Kimmy said, my name is Megan Rowe, and I am the Fair Housing Analyst here at the Housing and Community Development Department. Today, we're going to walk through my absolute favorite subject, the basics of fair housing. Our objective today is to gain a foundational knowledge about fair housing and housing discrimination so that as the ambassadors, when we go out into our communities, we know that we are sharing appropriate information. So first, let's remind ourselves why this topic is so important. Where you live truly matters. Housing plays a significant role in determining your quality of life because it directly affects your access to transportation and recreation in your neighborhood, housing that is within your budget, your social, cultural, and educational opportunities, as well as employment, medical services, and entertainment opportunities. Housing discrimination restricts access to these opportunities, but this can majorly impact our lives. For instance, we know that children whose families move to neighborhoods with better access to opportunities by age 13 earned higher future earnings than their peers and have higher college attendance rates. Housing discrimination is real and ongoing, and there are many things that need to happen to prevent it. However, we believe that those who are aware of their rights are empowered to assert their rights. They may have more access to the opportunities that they were previously denied. The Fair Housing Act is at the center of all this work. As for those unaware, it is the civil rights law that was created to put an end to discriminatory practices in any activities related to housing. The purpose of this act is to ensure that every person has the right to rent, purchase, or obtain a mortgage on a home without fear of discrimination due to their membership or perceived membership in a particular class. The prohibition on housing discrimination started with the landmark Supreme Court case in 1948, Shelley versus Claimer, when the Supreme Court ruled to prohibit the enforcement of racially restrictive covenants in private contracts. As such, state action would be discriminatory and violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Followed in 1964 by the landmark Civil Rights Act, which prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in public spaces. The Fair Housing Act occurred 4 years later and is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1963, which was ratified immediately following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It initially covered race, color, religion, and national origin. Sex discrimination was added in 1974 as a part of the Fair Housing Act Amendment and Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Remember, this was when women were given the right to obtain credit. And finally, in 1988, disability and familial status were added as protected classes in another amendment act. So the Fair Housing Act covers a number of processes around housing and housing transactions. They include the rental or sale of housing services and facilities, advertising, lending and insurance, reasonable accommodations and modifications for people with disabilities, and accommodations for those with limited English proficiency, as well as protecting residents from harassment and retaliation. So now let's go a little deeper into the protected classes. Again, the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination against any of the following protected classes: race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. We're going to walk together through each class so that we're all on the same page as to who is exactly covered by that class. We'll be going through examples of discrimination for each class more in depth in our next session for housing and renters. Race. Race is a grouping of individuals associated with a racial or ethnic group. This can refer to be Black, White, Asian, Pacific Islander, etc. It's important to note that racial discrimination includes discrimination for perceived race or being biracial. The person does not actually have to be the race in question for it to be a violation. The question, what are you? Or where is your family from? Those could be signs of racial discrimination. Also, racial discrimination can occur because of association with a particular race or races. Color. Color may or may not be related to race or national origin. One skin color is not more protected than another. That being said, it is important to note that color discrimination or colorism can occur by individuals within the same race, and that people with darker skin tend to experience incidents of discrimination in housing more frequently. National origin. National origin is the relationship between an individual and a state. It refers to a person's ancestry, birthplace, ethnic background, or language. Discrimination based on national origin means discrimination based on not only where you are from, but where your family is from, and your language or customs. Of note, discrimination based on limited English proficiency, that's the limited ability to read, write, speak, or understand English well or at all, is covered under national origin and can also be considered race discrimination. Familial status. Familial status protects families with children under the age of 18 from discriminatory action, including couples adopting children, legal guardians of children, foster parents, grandparents with dependents, and pregnant women. Religion. The Fair Housing Act prohibits housing providers from treating renters or home buyers differently because of their religion, their perceived religion, what people assume they practice, or because they engage in religious practices and rituals. Sex. Sex is the range of characteristics pertaining to and differentiating between masculinity and femininity based on biological sex. Gender stereotyping, sexual harassment, and discriminatory pricing are all examples of discrimination based on sex. In January of this year, 2021, HUD announced that it will administer and enforce the Fair Housing Act, prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity under the protected class of sex. So, in short, sexual orientation and gender identity are now covered under the Fair Housing Act as of January of this year. Finally, disability. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination against individuals who have disabilities or who are associated with people with disabilities. A disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits major life activities, such as walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, learning, working, or caring for oneself. People who are regarded as disabled or have a record of disability are also protected. Discrimination based on disability can also occur if a person is denied reasonable accommodation, such as allowing assistance animals or providing an assigned parking place closest to unit, as well as reasonable modification that would allow a person full use of housing features, such as lowering cabinets and light switches or installing a ramp for a wheelchair user. There are also certain groups that are not directly protected under the Fair Housing Act. However, sometimes these groups are associated with a protected class, so please be aware of these potential connections. Again, the following are not protected classes under federal law. Source of income. The state of Texas ruled that local jurisdictions could not enact laws that prohibited an owner from refusing to rent or lease to a person because of a person's lawful source of income to pay rent, like funding from housing assistance programs. Some housing advocates believe that when landlords can discriminate against tenants based on their source of income, housing discrimination can be perpetuated since the majority of housing choice voucher participants are people of color. Age. Age is not a protected class, but both families with children and disabilities are, both of which can be tied to age discrimination. Marital status. Again, not protected, but it is often related to familial status. And finally, criminal record. People with criminal records are not protected by the Fair Housing Act. However, according to HUD, due to racial and ethnic disparities in the U.S. justice system, criminal history-based restrictions on access to housing are likely to disproportionately affect Black and Hispanic residents. So again, while these are not considered protected classes, sometimes they are associated with a protected class, and we want people to be aware of these potential connections. And now, I'll turn it back over to Kimmy, who will discuss the different types of discrimination with you. Kimmy?
Thank you, Megan. Okay, so now let's discuss 3 types of discrimination. The first one we'll cover today is overt discrimination, unequal treatment, and disparate impact. So the first, overt discrimination is actively and openly limiting access to housing on the basis of a protected class. So for example, refusing to rent to someone solely because he was born in Saudi Arabia and is a Muslim. So referring back to the 7 protected classes that Megan just covered, what protected classes do we see being discriminated here? Please take a second and type your answer in the chat. So for this example, what protected classes do we see being discriminated here? And it looks like some of them are coming through. Okay. Correct. I'm seeing national origin and religion. Yes, faith and origin. Same. Okay, awesome. Yes, that's correct. National origin and religion. Awesome. So unequal treatment is treating people differently based on a protected class status. So for instance, in this example, requiring a renter with 2 children to pay twice the security deposit of a renter without children. What protected class or status is being affected here? And you can type that answer in the chat as well. Okay. Seeing them come through, absolutely. Familial status is it. Absolutely correct. Lots of correct answers. And finally, we have disparate impact, which is a little bit more complex than the other forms of discrimination. Disparate impact is when a policy, program, or system has a discriminatory effect on a protected class while appearing to treat everyone the same. And so remember, a law does not need to be intentionally discriminatory in order for it to be a violation of fair housing laws. So our last example, an apartment complex is only allowing people with full-time jobs. What protected class or classes could this impact? So an apartment complex only allowing people to live there with full-time jobs. What are those protected class, or what protected class could this impact? Yes, I am seeing some answers pop up. So we have, yeah, I am seeing disability. Correct. Familial status. Awesome. Those are correct. Yeah. Familial status, disability, some income. Okay. Um, Next slide, please. So in our next session on Thursday, December 2nd, we're going to further discuss the experiences of renters, including the types of discrimination that they typically encounter. And so that discussion will include discriminatory practices, such as the ones that you see here, misrepresentation, refusal, steering, preferential advertising, denial of reasonable accommodations, or modification. So please stay tuned and register to attend if you have not already for the Thursday session, and we look forward to having you there. So finally, we're also going to cover some of the resources later in our training. But as you begin your planning, we want to point out that we have a variety of outreach materials that you can use and share with your community. So as we discussed in the grant introduction workshop, we have downloadable fair housing information in 6 different languages on our website. And we also have a landlord tenant fair housing hotline that's free to any caller. And so this hotline is a great resource. And we want people to know that they can call anytime they have tenant landlord questions or fair housing questions. And finally, a staff member from the fair housing team is available to give presentations about fair housing related topics to any type of audience, and that information is there. So at this time, but before we close, let's return to our poll. So on a scale of 1 to 5, please tell us, how well do you understand your basic fair housing rights and can teach others about their rights? And as those answers are coming in, I want to thank you for attending these sessions, and we look forward to receiving your proposals. And at this time, I'm going to open the floor for questions for our team.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. This is Megan again. We have a couple of questions in the chat that we'd love to address. First of all, and I apologize, I'm looking over here where my chat is. So the first, why is criminal record, age, marital status, source of income, why are these not protected classes? And the short answer is talk to your congressman. These are legislative acts that are passed by Congress, and so need political support. If that is something that you care about, then that there are different groups of people and activists that are working on that. But that is definitely a legislative matter at the federal, state, and local levels. So we have another question. Could a policy that excludes undocumented immigrant renters be considered disparate impact, as it excludes people from countries of origin outside of the U.S.? And yes, these could get complicated, but the general rule of thumb is if it is asking specific questions to specific people, that it is a fair housing concern. If it's not covering everybody equally, then yes, that would be a fair housing concern. Do you have anything else you guys want to add to that question? Because that one can be kind of complex. Nope. Okay. Yeah. So in short, yes, that sounds very much like it is on its way to being a fair housing violation. And again, none of we can give referrals and we can give advice, but we cannot give legal advice. So just this little a little clause there. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? Are there any other questions? And I do want to point out again, income, I said this in the chat, but income is unfortunately currently not a protected class. It is certainly a fair housing concern, and if can be proven to be tied to one of the protected classes, which is often the case, then it is something that we are absolutely going to be thinking about and planning for, but it is not in itself a protected class.
I have a question. This is
Sure.
Cecilia Fontenot with Fair Housing Neighborhood Rights. If you have a married couple and there's two income, and that's enough to pay for the rent, why is it not protected?
I think, not knowing a lot about that situation, source of income, again, the state of Texas did rule that it is not protected. So unfortunately, we cannot rule that as a fair housing issue. And also marital status, it's not protected as well. So unfortunately, we've kind of got two things there that are unprotected. And landlords can make that decision. Sorry, that's not a very satisfying answer.
Well, okay. That law needs to change.
Yeah.
Along with
okay, so we have a couple more questions. Yes. Do we have a couple more questions? Let's see. Will the sessions be posted for review or links sent out to participants? Absolutely, yes. We will be posting those on the website. And will a link be going out as well, or is it just on the website?
It'll be on the website, yes.
Okay, and then I can answer this, but I'm happy to read it out loud. Does the City of Houston have any type of mentorship programs outside of this program to help you with getting your nonprofit up and running?
I can try to help. I know this is Mary Itz, and I work with Kimmy and Megan at the City of Houston's Housing and Community Development Department. I don't know of any programs within the city that help with a nonprofit, but I know that the Department of Neighborhoods, also the Planning Department through the Complete Communities program, really do support nonprofits in that way. The City of Houston's Housing and Community Development Department does not have any sort of sessions to help you become a nonprofit. But hopefully those resources at the Department of Neighborhoods, the Planning Department, can help point you in the right direction.
Thank you, Mary. And finally, just a reminder, guys, I know this feels like the end of a session, but this is just the beginning of our training. We're doing a fair housing session, and then we will be getting into the meat of the program. A couple more questions, and then we will move on. Why are landlords allowed to require photo ID with rental applications? I understand verifying once someone is approved, but it seems like an opportunity to discriminate. That is a good question. And we encourage you, if you have questions like this with specifics, to call our hotline. Can we put that resources page up again? I'm afraid I am not great at memorizing phone numbers like the millennial that I am. So the landlord hotline there, if you have questions about specific incidences, we would happily take those questions. Okay, and finally, have we awarded this grant in the past? Where can we find this information? So we had a iteration of this grant 2 years ago at this point, I believe. But this is really a new thing that we've revamped it. So is that page still up or available?
No, the Fair Housing page, the Fair Housing Ambassador Program page for the 2021-2022 program is the page that is available for this program. I will drop that link in the chat. I'm not sure the other and the previous page exists, but all the information for this program is on the website. So I'll drop that in the chat right now.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, and again, we're going to move on now, but if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at fairhousing@houstontx.gov. That's fairhousing@houstontx.gov. Also call that hotline. And for you, those of you on the phone, let me read that out loud to you. I do apologize. The Fair Housing hotline for any fair housing questions, 32-394-200 extension 5. That's 832-394-6200 extension 5. Thank you very much. Michaela, you're muted.
All right, sorry about that. I was muted. Thank you for participating the first half of our program today, covering the basics of fair housing. We're going to take a 5-minute intermission. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to add them to the chat and our team members will follow up with you. The second half of our presentation is going to cover community outreach. So please either stay at your computers and plan to join us again in 5 minutes so you can learn about the 7 steps to successful community outreach and building a great plan for fair housing outreach in your own community. So again, join us again in 5 minutes. We're also putting the time in the chat for you to refer back to. We'll get started again at approximately 9:50 a.m. Also, if you have not yet had an opportunity to download the digital training packet, we'll be dropping that link in the chat again, and you can navigate to the section on the housing page that says training sessions, and under training 1, there is a button and a link to download the PDF version of this training. It also has a ton of other resources and supplemental materials So if you've not yet had a chance to download that guide, I highly recommend you take this intermission time to download a copy.
Hello, is anyone there?
Yeah, we're here. We're on break. We're on an intermission, and it starts back up
Okay,
at 9:50.
okay, all right then. Now it's Reverend Caldwell. I am multitasking, so
Good
Oh
morning.
yeah.
I'm a
Oh, yeah.
little late calling in. Hello all.
Thank you for
Um,
joining us. I see a question in the chat about the digital training packet. Everyone can download a free copy of the digital training packet. It complements today's training. We're
no,
going to
I'm looking for the
post the link
location.
in the chat. The
The
link is in the
location
chat.
to find it. I'm sorry. Where did you say we can locate that at? Is it in the email? Because I'm looking.
There is a link in the chat that you can click to be directed to download it.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Of
All right.
course.
So I clicked on that link and I can't, oh, there it is. Never mind. Got it.
This
Oh,
is Kim
okay.
Johnson. That packet is also on our program page. I will drop that link in the chat, and it's under session 1. You'll just see training packet. You can find it there as well.
Thank you so much.
Of course, and we're going to get started on the second half of our presentation in one. All right, everyone, welcome back, and thank you again for joining us today for training 1 of the Fair Housing Ambassador Program. As Gandhi has famously said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." This quote is a great example of the motivation behind community outreach. Community outreach is how you engage with your community about a topic and encourage them to act on it. This photo is from a community outreach campaign, Taylor Collective Solutions, conducted in 2019 and 2020 in El Paso, Texas, encouraging residents across El Paso County to complete their census questionnaires. In the photo, you can see volunteers are holding signs in English and Spanish, encouraging their neighbors to take the census. TCS worked with volunteers such as these and community leaders across the county to teach them how to go into their neighborhoods and teach residents, family members, friends, and colleagues about the importance of the census and all the benefits that a complete census count would bring to the community. Benefits included better health care, infrastructure, schools, and much more. And in the case of this photo, the pandemic very negatively impacted many residents in the area, and volunteers attended food banks with these signs and spoke with residents about the census and how a complete census count helps inform funding for critical services like food banks for residents in need. Volunteers having this kind of face-to-face interaction with residents and having conversations with community members about the census had a huge impact on El Paso's census response. In fact, El Paso achieved a higher census self-response rate than the state average for Texas, as well as higher than any other major metropolitan city in the state. This demonstrates the power of community outreach. When you have limited resources and time, you want to ensure that your community outreach strategies are directly hitting your target audiences. You can ensure that your community outreach is successful and effective by utilizing this step-by-step process. We will refer back to this step process many times as the 7 steps to successful community outreach. First step is to identify your target audience, the community in which you want to serve. Then you develop your message, a persuasive communication strategy to educate them about the topic that's important to you, in this case, fair housing. Then you make a plan for outreach and decide where you are going to spread your message and how. Along the way, we encourage you to set goals and metrics for success to track the success of your community outreach and its impact in the community. Then you go into the community as a fair housing ambassador and engage with residents about fair housing topics. Track your progress along the way and conduct follow-up. Tracking progress is important to, again, ensure that you are fulfilling those previously set goals, and follow-up is just another way to engage with your community once more. We will be going through all of the 7 steps for successful community outreach in the 3 training programs. Today, we will be focusing on steps 1 and 2. For training 2, which is this Thursday, we will be reviewing steps 3 and 4. And finally, Tuesday next week, we will be reviewing steps 5, 6, and 7. By really honing in on these first few steps through our trainings, it is our goal to help you build a very strong foundation to build a community outreach plan in your own community about fair housing and have a greater rate of success and impact as a fair housing ambassador in your own neighborhoods. So, our first step is identifying your target audience. Questions you can consider when identifying your target audience is who they are and where they are. These questions will help you visualize exactly who you should be communicating with in your target audience. Data points such as socioeconomic status and demographics, different data points which are shown on the slide, are ways to help define your target audience. There are many, many resources to help learn more about your target audience through data. One example is the Rice University Kinder Institute for Urban Research's data platform at datahouston.org. It is called the Houston Community Data Connections Dashboard. It is a free resource that you can use to find demographics about residents in neighborhoods across Houston. When you go to the Data Houston website, there's a section called Data Dashboard. You can see the arrow pointing to it on the screen. And when you click that button, it will navigate you to their free data dashboard. I highly recommend that everyone checks out this website after today's training session to poke around and see what kind of data you can pull up about your own community or the community that you serve. One of our staff members has shared a link to that in the chat. Today we're going to focus on a feature called Community Profile. It's on the left-hand bar of the data dashboard. When you click on Community Profile, it will pull up an interactive map of Houston, and you can hover over different areas of the map to pull up data about that neighborhood. For this example, we are going to look at the 5th Ward neighborhood in the inner loop of Houston. And as soon as you click on that highlighted section of any neighborhood on the map, it will pull up this dashboard with data about that area. You can see the total population, the land area, poverty rate, unemployment rate, There's a bar graph with race and ethnicity, a pie graph with age demographics, and another bar graph with educational attainment. So looking at the Fifth Ward as an example in this dashboard, you can see that most residents under the race and ethnicity bar graph are Hispanic or Latino, followed very closely by non-Hispanic African American. A majority of residents are between 35 to 64 years old, followed by 18 to 34 years old. A slight majority of residents have a high school diploma. However, a very close second is that residents do not have a diploma. The unemployment rate is 9.61%, which is higher than the nationwide average of 5.6%. And finally, the poverty rate for the Fifth Ward neighborhood is 36.89%, which is more than double the Texas average of 13.6%. There is so much more data beyond this initial dashboard. If you go to the second tab called Full Profile, it will pull up an additional spreadsheet of data. This includes valuable information such as median household income, renter versus owner-occupied units, public school enrollment, access to transportation and access to internet, and much, much more. Again, I highly recommend that everyone checks out datahouston.org after today's session to learn more about the neighborhood you live in or the community you serve in, and familiarize with these different data resources. So in summary, for the Fifth Ward neighborhood, we've learned that the median household income is approximately $27,000, which is significantly lower than the Texas average median household income of about $61,000. A vast majority of residences are renter occupied at 66% versus 33% owner occupied. The primary ethnic group is Hispanic, followed very closely by the secondary group of non-Hispanic African American. With age demographics, the primary age group is 35 to 64 years old, followed by 18 to 34 years old. And finally, with regards to educational attainment, the primary is a high school diploma, and the secondary majority being no high school diploma. So with this data resource and your own personal experiences in the communities you live and serve in, you can begin to visualize your target audience as a fair housing ambassador. You can take this data a step further by creating a persona, which is a fictional representation of a resident in your target audience. Based off of the demographics of the Fifth Ward, we have created two sample personas. The first persona is a young woman named Maria. Her age and race demographics are in line with the data we just pulled on the Fifth Ward neighborhood. She's Hispanic, and her age falls into the secondary age group majority. She also falls into the educational attainment category, as she has a high school diploma. And in a persona, you can become very creative and thinking about the daily lives of this fictional resident in your target community. So we've written that Maria lives with her boyfriend and two dogs in an apartment in the Fifth Ward. She frequently visits places like school as she's pursuing higher education, her work at a local gym, and the dog park with her boyfriend and two dogs. In her free time, she also enjoys cooking, working out, and spending time with her dogs and family. But Maria is not the only type of resident that you would see in the Fifth Ward. The other sample persona that we have put together is for a father named Dave. He lives with his wife and child in the Fifth Ward and spends most of his free time with his family and is a big fan of sports and especially enjoys watching the Houston Astros. He works as a cashier at a gas station. He falls into the majority age range, race, and household income levels that we pulled from the data dashboard that was shown earlier for the Fifth Ward. Building multiple personas to visualize your target audience is a creative and critical way to visualize your audience and inform the next step of community outreach. The second step being developing. We would like to practice building personas together. So let's take this time to either grab a pen and paper and work your way through the persona activity, or if you've had an opportunity to download the digital training packet, there's also a worksheet for the persona activity in that PDF that you can use. We'll take about 2 minutes to work independently and be creative and think critically about the average type of person you would see in your target community, and think about how they live their daily lives, where they work, who they spend their time with. And in the next step, we'll see how this information will really benefit building a strong message of not only who to talk to, but how to talk to them. So we're going to take about 2 minutes. You can grab a pen and paper, you can pull up the digital packet, or just make some mental notes of who a persona would look like for your target community. And again, if you haven't had an opportunity to download the free complimentary training packet for today's session, we've dropped the link in the chat. There's a persona worksheet in the packet that you can print and work your way through after today's activity. The examples we showed about Maria and Dave are also in the training packet for you to refer back to. So we'll take 1 more minute for everyone to work independently and think about a persona for your target community. All right, so as everyone's working your way through the persona activity, we would like to share personas with one another. So if you feel comfortable and would like to unmute and tell us about your community that you either live or serve in and what type of persona you've built, or you can also use the chat feature to tell us a bit about the persona that you've created. I do see a question in the chat, whether we are going to send everything in an email. We can send a follow-up email with a link to the digital training packet, as well as a recording of today's presentation. All of those materials will be made available to participants for future reference. So do we have any volunteers who have worked their way through some of these questions and would like to tell us about their persona?
Sure, I can go
I have
first.
one. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead first. Women first.
I didn't finish it all the way. Let me see if I can turn my camera on. I don't have my good camera, but let's see. Will it let me? Okay, it won't let me. Anywho, so my persona was a mother of 4. She's 42 years old. She does live in Fifth Ward. She's a CNA. She makes about $12 an hour. But she does work about 12 hours most days. So she's away from home a lot. She speaks English. She does work at the church. She's one of the people that likes to cook at the church. So she does participate in her church. That's her give back to her community. So those are the activities basically. But That's all I had came up with because I was trying to find the page on the packet in the packet. So I just
That's
went from
awesome.
memory.
Thank you so much for sharing. And just from hearing about your persona, you can start to think of how would I speak to them? Where would I speak to them? That would be convenient to teach them about fair housing. If they're frequently at their church, that's an opportunity where you could go to a popular place of worship in your community to talk to residents about fair housing. Since she's a mother, she's likely very involved with her children, and that could be another way you could talk to them about fair housing, like the protected classes, familial status, given that she has 4 children. So that's how you can take this creative and critical thinking activity and begin to build it into a real foundation for community outreach. Do we have another volunteer who would like to share about their persona?
Yes. Mine is I'm a 36-year-old male, about 36,000 a year, African American. Primary language will be English. South Part. He is married. Works at a warehouse. He does forklift. English that he worked. The English language that he used in the warehouse would be English. He does have a degree, and what he likes to do in his hobbies is gardening, shopping, and church. And on the weekend, spend time with wife and travel.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're seeing that places of worship are very important and frequently visited places in many people's lives. And it can be an opportunity to meet your target audience where they are and break down some of those barriers where they might not know about fair housing and their rights. But if you're able to meet them where they are, you can have a better opportunity to educate them. And you had also mentioned shopping at the garden store. And when we were doing work in El Paso for the census, one of the earlier examples, we had seen people really only leaving their homes to go shopping, whether they were going to a grocery store or the hardware store, only going to places that were for necessities during the pandemic. And we had set up tables at grocery stores and other frequently visited places to meet people where they are. And the more convenient that you can engage with your target audience, the more effective that you'll be. You're not necessarily trying to promote for them to come to you or to seek out your advice and education, but actually going to somewhere where they frequently go. So that's why location is a big part of building your persona and identifying your target audience. We can take one more volunteer if anyone would like to share out about their persona as well.
I'll share if I can. Somebody else? Okay. So I have a middle-aged young lady, 52 years old. She's a female. She works at the grocery store, local grocery store, making $12 an hour. She is Hispanic. She speaks, her primary language is Spanish. Her primary language at work is English, and her level of education is high school. She is in the Cashmere Gardens area. She is a renter. She lives with her husband and 2 kids in their 20s. Activities, she likes going to sporting games. On the weekend, she goes to church and does cookouts, and she spends most of her time with her family.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I love how you mentioned that your persona is bilingual, and a big thing you want to consider when you're thinking of how to communicate with your target audience is their language preferences. So you can create materials that are in both English and Spanish, And I know there's so many different languages that are spoken in Houston, and you should be really cognizant of the preferred language of your target audience. Again, referring back to that photo example of the census, you could see that the women were holding posters, and some of them were in Spanish and some of them were in English. So they were able to draw in attention based off of a resident's preferred language. And those volunteers were also bilingual. So whether someone approached them and spoke in English or Spanish and wanted to learn, why are you guys out here holding these signs? Can you tell me more about the census? That they were able to effectively engage and have a really personal conversation because they know the language preferences of their target community. I think we have a hand raised for Anne. We can take one more persona if you'd still like to share out about your persona.
Well, mine was similar to the second person. So it was a 59-year-old female, and she makes $30,000 a year and has worked for the city of Houston for a while. And she's African American and speaks English, and she lives in a house with a son and his girlfriend and grandchild. And she goes to the library, shopping, and church. And her skills would be her community that she uses at work: community connections, empathy, and ability to analyze data. She has a high school diploma, and she mostly spends time on the weekend with church activities, friends, and family.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Again, we are seeing that the church is very central to many communities. There are many different types of religions, faiths, denominations, and places of worship across all of our communities. And you can be very creative in how you take that information to communicate with people about fair housing. I had previously said an example about having a table and just speaking to people about fair housing. You could also approach leadership at the place of worship and ask if you could do a presentation. During the census, we had many volunteers who told us that their place of worship is so central to their lives and their community, and they approached their own ministers to see if they could present, and were able to speak to their own congregation and their peers about a topic that was really important to them. And after service, then you've piqued interest and you've opened the door to have face-to-face conversations after doing a presentation. So there are a lot of creative ways that you can engage with your target audience, and we'll do a much deeper dive into community outreach strategies in session 2. And I hope that through this activity, you can begin to visualize who your audience is and the best ways to meet them where they are and what language to speak with them, what types of protected classes they might fall under that you could educate them about their rights. So now we'll move on to the second step of community outreach, and this is developing your message and creating a persuasive communication strategy to talk to your previously defined target audience about fair housing. And you'll see all of these steps really build off of one another. So you want to dedicate and really consider each step so that you can build a stronger and stronger community outreach plan with each step. So going back to our sample personas, we have Maria and Dave up on the screen again, and talking to a 22-year-old college student like Maria is very different from talking to a 37-year-old father like Dave. Although they live in the same neighborhood, They frequent different locations, they speak different primary languages, and through that persona activity, when everyone was sharing out, you'll begin to see that through creating multiple personas, you can see what other common denominators are in their lives, such as places of worship are a very common place that's frequently visited in a person's life and is very central to their lives. So to do so, to build a persuasive messaging and communication strategy, we have put together a checklist. A copy of this checklist is included in the digital training packet for your convenience. And again, we are recording today's presentation, so you'll be able to refer back to this training. We'll include the digital training packet in the chat again if you haven't had an opportunity to download it yet. The first step in the checklist to creating a strong message is considering your target audience and what topics or statements would resonate with them. Envision your desired outcome from community outreach. Is it generally talking to someone about their fair housing rights, or are you really passionate about the protected classes? Decide on 3 takeaway messages or calls to action. So how can you communicate with someone to achieve your desired outcome? Developing an engaging statement to compel residents to want to learn more and reining in their interest. Keeping your messaging short, concise, and easy to understand. You want to open the door to have conversations and not necessarily bombard people with too much information at once. And utilize resources from the City of Houston's Housing and Community Development Department. There are examples and toolkits of how to speak about fair housing. There are sample posters and social media posts. There are so many resources that are available to you, and you don't need to create a whole messaging campaign on your own. So long as you are very insightful about who you're speaking with, you'll be able to find resources that will support your desired outcome and your target community. So by following all of these tips in this checklist, you can build a persuasive message and open the door to talk to residents about fair housing. So following this checklist will help craft an effective message campaign for your community outreach. I'm going to show a quick 30-second video example of how the Taylor Collective Solutions built a persuasive advertisement for residents in El Paso during the 2020 census. You'll see how we used these best practices and really utilize the checklist to be persuasive. Our target audience, for context, is predominantly Spanish-speaking, low-income residents in El Paso County. These were residents who were the least likely to participate in the census, but would benefit the most from a complete count and all the resources it brings to the community. So we really wanted to emphasize those resources and visualize how a complete count would directly benefit a resident's life in our target audience. Everything we created in this community outreach campaign in El Paso was bilingual in English and Spanish. So we had created Spanish versions of this video. We're going to show the English version today for everyone's accessibility. And again, just as you're watching the video, think about this checklist and, oh, that was a call to action, or what was the engaging statement that really hits home and makes someone consider. So I'm going to get that video queued up.
The 2020 census means more to El Paso than you know. It's what helps our community receive funding for food, school, housing, and healthcare programs. Without you, money that helps keep us educated, fed, and sheltered could disappear. Participate online by phone or by mail. Everyone in El Paso County must be counted, even children and babies. Your responses are safe and required by law to be kept strictly confidential. Let's come together and fill out the census. If not, we all lose. Together, fearless, we count. The 2020 means
Sorry, we weren't able to see it.
Sorry about that. I'm getting it queued up again. It's just the audio. My apologies.
The 2020 census means more to El Paso than you know. It's what helps our community receive funding for food, school, housing, and healthcare programs. Without you, money that helps keep us healthy, educated, fed, and sheltered could disappear. Participate online by phone or by mail. Everyone in El Paso County must be counted, even children and babies. Your responses are safe and required by law to be kept strictly confidential. Let's come together and fill out the census. If not, we all lose. Together, fearless, we count.
All right, thank you everyone for bearing with those technical difficulties. I'm going to play the video one more time, and this time as you're watching and listening in, try and consider what is the desired outcome we're trying to convey, and what are the calls to action we are telling viewers.
The 2020 census means more to El Paso than you know. It's what helps our community receive funding for food, school, housing, and healthcare programs. Without you, money that helps keep us healthy, educated, fed, and sheltered could disappear. Participate online by phone or by mail. Everyone in El Paso County must be counted, even children and babies. Your responses are safe and required by law to be kept strictly confidential. Let's come together and fill out the census. If not, we all lose. Together, fearless, we count.
Awesome. Thank you for those of you who are participating in the chat. I love to see that you are calling out the different examples from the checklist that you're seeing in the video. Someone had mentioned that the statement, together we count, is very powerful, and that's an example of our engaging statement. It's really meant to evoke a sense of communal responsibility to take the census and the communal benefits that the community would receive if everyone completed their census. Let's fill out the census is another call out I see in the Q&A. That is a call to action. So our desired outcome is that we want a complete count in El Paso for the census. So one of the calls to action was complete the census. You'll also see another example is that the video said count everyone in your household, including children and babies. And that was an educational component that residents may not know that even babies should be included in your census. But that's a call to action, is make sure every person in your household is counted. And I see another comment in the chat about with you or without you. This was our primary message throughout the campaign for the 2020 census in El Paso. And we wanted to illustrate the benefits of completing the census and putting a direct visual of how a child's life would be positively impacted by the census. So early on in the video, you saw when she was having breakfast before school, she had a simple breakfast, and with the census, she could have a more nutritional breakfast. Another example was the medicine cabinet in her home when she was sick, and before the census, there was no medicine to help her when she was ill. but through completing the census, that brings funding to your community for healthcare. So the visual was that she had a stocked medicine cabinet when she was sick. So now we're going to go through another example of community outreach, and this is a direct example from the City of Houston's Housing and Community Development Department. This is a fair housing ad, and we're going to go through the checklist and identify how these best practices make their way into the final communications and messaging. First, we can see that the target audience is people of color, and there's a family of color posted on the ad. And if that is something that really speaks to your lived experience, it'll help draw your attention. The desired outcome from this ad is for homeowners of color to receive fair quotes for homes. There's a section on the ad that directly says that homeowners, Black homeowners receive higher quotes on homes. So we're wanting to educate homeowners of color in our community that this is an ongoing problem and to know your rights. The engaging statement is very bolded at the top and attention grabbing. It is, our race should not determine our ability to buy a home. And this engaging statement brings you in, and it also speaks to race, which is a protected class under the Fair Housing Act. There are many different takeaways, so we recommend having at least 3 calls to action in any of your messaging, but this example has 4. So first, it talks about how race is a protected class. There's the educational component and telling you that if you are a person of color, that you fall into this protected class. There's the direct example that homeowners of color receive higher home sales quotes. We provide the Fair Housing Hotline. You'll see the number and the extension. And there's also an encouragement for residents to learn more about fair housing at the City of Houston's website. You'll see the link below. So as you can see, utilizing that checklist and the best practices will really help you build a well-rounded and effective message, just like this example for fair housing. So what are some other examples of calls to action or key takeaways that you can use in a message for fair housing? First, you can encourage residents to report a complaint. You can motivate residents to call the Fair Housing hotline, and make sure you include the full phone number and extension. You can educate residents about the need for affordable housing. You can help residents identify housing discrimination by speaking to them about different protected classes, or providing real-life examples of housing discrimination, like how in the previous ad there was an example about how homeowners of color receive higher home sales quotes. So that's a direct example that someone can see how they could be potentially discriminated against as a renter or a homeowner, a home buyer. These different calls to action for your community outreach about fair housing ensure that your messaging is not only educational, but actionable, and will encourage positive change in your community. So you not only want to educate residents about fair housing, but you want to give them the tools to put that into action and protect themselves from discrimination or report complaints when they see discrimination. So at this time, I can take any questions about community outreach, and the first two steps that we reviewed, which are identifying your target audience and developing your messaging. If you have a question, you can unmute, or if you feel more comfortable, you can also put your questions in the chat, and we'll dedicate some time to review those questions. Do we have a volunteer with a question?
Hi, this is Nakia Sims. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. I wasn't able to get on, so I'm calling from the phone. So one of my questions, I had an opportunity to work with a national organization, Respectability, that works on not having ableism and making sure there's accessibility for people with visible and non-visible disabilities. Could you touch upon ways to do that and intentionality, considering e-readers and just ways to approach also people with non-visible and visible disabilities and engagement as your one component of your target audience?
Yes, that is a great question. Thank you. We faced this obstacle when we were working in El Paso for the census. One of the different groups that we were trying to encourage to take the census was the elderly community. And during the pandemic, we had focused very strongly on digital outreach and marketing, but the elderly group did not fall into commonly using and getting their information that way. So we addressed that barrier by doing canvassing and going out into the community and having that face-to-face conversation. With different accessibility issues, sometimes the easiest way around that is just to have that face-to-face conversation. So if someone has trouble with their vision and they're not able to read due to a disability, then putting up a poster would not be an effective way to communicate that with them. But if you have a table at an event or a place of worship, then you could be able to have a face-to-face conversation with them. Also, speaking to my personal experience, my father has a service dog, and he has difficulty going to some of the frequently visited places that we had previously talked about. So you can, again, just think of if accessibility is a barrier in your target community, considering how does that impact their daily lives. And that's an important step in building the personas. And he may not be, my father may not be going to a place of worship like other personas in that community because he has a service dog. So thinking of other ways that he commonly gets his information, people that he spends his time with, other locations that he frequently visits. All of those critical questions you can think with a lens of accessibility in that very first step of defining your target audience.
And Michaela, if I could jump in, this is a favorite topic of ours, fair housing in HCDD. And we often work closely with the mayor's office of people with disabilities. So I know their number one tip that they like to give out is to make sure that when you're posting on social, especially, to make sure that you have alt text and everything, that you are not relying on images. A lot of times we will use people will post pictures that are basically little flyers online, and then it's completely unreadable to anyone who has vision issues. So that's something to consider. We have lots of resources at Fair Housing. So if you would like to continue this conversation, please email us at fairhousing@HoustonText.gov. Accessibility is one of our big obsessions. So thank you.
And speaking of emailing, if you have a question after today's session or a question you may not feel comfortable asking in front of the big, amazing group of participants we have here today, my colleague will be dropping all of our contact emails. So you can email us with your community outreach questions. If you're wondering about your particular community, if you have ideas about ways to speak with them, or places to communicate with them, but you're not sure, or if you have any questions related to basics of fair housing, like the protected classes, if you want to learn more about disability and accessibility, the City of Houston's contact emails are included in the chat as well. We can take more questions if anyone wants to drop their question in the chat about community outreach, or if you would like to unmute. I see a question about whether a recorded version of today's training will be posted. Yes, it will. So following all 3 training sessions, we will be posting the presentations, and you can also download a digital training packet for free off of the City of Houston's Fair Housing website to have instant access and a copy of all of today's slides, all of the different worksheets and examples. There's also a link to the El Paso video. I saw in the chat that someone had asked about whether they could view that video again. There's a link for the video. We can also add it in the chat. So there's so many resources that we want you all to have easy access to. And again, if you have follow-up questions, our emails are in the chat.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Our organization, we are a religious-based organization at church, and our demographic here is mostly African American, but we are in Kashmere Gardens, which kind of corners that 5th Ward area. So the majority of our target audience is Hispanic. Are there resources out there, or where can we find the resources to take a lot of our documentations and literature that we would like to print up for the community and have it translated to Spanish so we can, reach more people? We have a campaign where we print off different newsletters from organizations and resources from the community, and we deliver them in a bag to their front porches every month. But a lot of our material is English because it's documentation that we either print up ourselves or we gather and print from different websites. So is there a place where we can, have that documentation transposed to Spanish as well, or an organization that offers that service? How can we, meet that need with limited resources? Thank you.
I have an idea outside of the City of Houston's resources, but real quick, Kimmy or Megan, Mary, are there any support systems with the city or the Fair Housing program that would be able to assist with outreach in multiple languages?
So the mayor's office at the City of Houston, the Office of New Americans and Immigrant Communities, Terrence O'Neill heads that office, and they actually have a advisory council, and members of that advisory council or Terrence O'Neill might be able to put you in contact with community members who are interested in assisting and helping nonprofit community organizations translate their materials. I'm not quite sure, but that would be the city's office that may know and may have information about community organizations that can assist other community organizations. So that's the Mayor's Office of New Americans and Immigrant Communities.
Mm-hmm. And another opportunity, we're seeing it in the chat right now, is that you are in a room right now full of your peers, and other community leaders and volunteers across Houston and the Houston-Galveston area who are representing many different languages, races, ethnicities, neighborhoods. And one of the really exciting parts of bringing together all of you in this virtual training is the opportunity to network. And the reason why we did like those quick introductions in the beginning is so you could see, oh, there's this other volunteer that's working in the neighborhood next to me, or an organization that's in the same community as me that I may not have heard of before, and they have the same interest in fair housing and serving the community as you do, since we are all here today. So I would recommend looking at the chat. There are people who have already reached out and said that they would love to help you, and the core of community outreach is community. And going back to the El Paso example, our volunteers were bilingual. They were called promotoras, and they were bilingual healthcare workers, and they were already working in the impoverished and predominantly Spanish-speaking communities of El Paso that was our target audience. And I myself am not bilingual. I identify as Asian American, so it was not as effective or appropriate for me to be going into that community to do the outreach when there are other volunteers that already are actively doing work in the community or live in that community that you can partner with and say, hey, in the case of the promotoras, they were doing community health initiatives. They were community health workers, and we approached them and asked if they could be census volunteers. So when they were having conversations with elderly Hispanic people, residents in El Paso, that they could also educate them about the census. So as you said, that the neighborhood next to you is predominantly Hispanic, you could either reach out to the folks that are engaging in the chat, or you can look for other partners in that area, like another, perhaps a Hispanic church, and say, hey, we would like to partner. We are hoping to participate in the City of Houston's Fair Housing Ambassador Program. Is this something you would be interested in? And you can not only combine your knowledge of each of your communities, but your resources as well. And we recommend those partnerships for your applications as well. You can partner with multiple organizations to really build that strong foundation of resources and knowledge and a communal bond. And Kimmy has added the information for the City of Houston's Office of New Americans and Immigrant Communities. That information is there if you would like to reach out about translation services. But again, there's power in people, and if you can find a partner or perhaps a volunteer who would be able to assist you with that, it's always better to build a message from within your community because you know your community. We can take another question if anyone would like to unmute. I'm also keeping an eye on our Q&A chat right now.
Yes. I was going to ask you to put everything in the chat that you had talked about, and I think you just did that. So we graciously appreciate that, young lady, and that's a beautiful smile you got.
Thank you. All right, well, my colleague is going to drop our emails in the chat one last time. If you have any other follow-up questions, please feel free to email myself or Kimmy with the Fair Housing Program. And before we wrap, I want to discuss the coaching sessions. So I had briefly mentioned coaching at the beginning of today's session, and coaching sessions are a way to take these trainings a step further, and it is also complementary. So we are offering group and individual video coaching sessions with a marketing expert from the Taylor Collective Solutions team, where you can talk about your ideas for a community outreach plan and just verify that you're on the right track, receive feedback on your messaging, how to be more persuasive, how to have effective calls to action. We are available and we want to help you take your community outreach plan to the next level. The overall benefit of participating in a coaching session is really being able to build a strong proposal, whether you would like to be a volunteer or funded fair housing ambassador with the program. And whether you plan to submit or not, if you're just learning, we still highly recommend that you participate in the coaching sessions that are offered just to learn more. To accommodate as many participants as possible, we are offering group coaching sessions starting next week. These are 1-hour video calls via Zoom, and you can drop in at any time with your prepared questions and ideas, or you can also attend and just learn from the different questions that your peers are asking. Again, it's another opportunity to network in a bit of a smaller group as the main training sessions. We are also offering one-on-ones. We only have 18 one-on-one coaching sessions available. They are 30 minutes starting next week from Wednesday through Friday. We do ask that you only sign up for a one-on-one if you intend on participating in all 3 of the training sessions, including today. And unfortunately, in the event that you are unable to attend all of the sessions and you have signed up for a one-on-one, we will have to give that spot away, as we are highly prioritizing participants that have attended all of the training sessions. And again, whether you're signing up for a one-on-one or you're dropping into a group coaching session, please come prepared with any of your questions. Have your worksheets, your persona worksheet, a checklist, different ideas and thoughts so you can really maximize your time with our marketing experts. To attend a group coaching session, you can join one of the Zoom rooms that are listed. This information is in the digital training packet. We'll also be emailing this after the 3rd training session, so you can easily access the day, time, and link to join the group training sessions, coaching sessions. And then for one-on-ones, we have Calendly links where you can find and select a time slot of 30 minutes that works for your schedule with either myself or my colleague Anayeli. And again, we can meet with up to 18 individuals. And if you are unable to sign up for a one-on-one, we still highly recommend that you join a group coaching session. So long as you come prepared with questions, we will do everything we can to support you and provide personalized feedback from our experience in community outreach and marketing. So again, all of those links are being dropped in the chat right now, and they're also in your digital training packets for future reference. And that concludes our first training session. Thank you to everyone who attended our kickoff training today. We look forward to seeing you at session 2, which is this Thursday, December 2nd, from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. CT. Thank you.
Thank you. I've enjoyed everything.
Thank you. And I saw a quick question, where the one-on-ones being held? They are all virtual. Our coaching sessions, whether it is a group coaching session or a one-on-one, You'll be provided with a video conference link.
Excuse me,
Thank you,
I can't
everyone.
see the chat. So for the sign up, is that available in one of the packets received earlier or
Yes,
previously?
yes. If you go to the City of Houston's Fair Housing Ambassador Program webpage, there is a training packet for today's session. If you navigate to Training 1, you'll see a button to download the training packet. And on the second page are all of the dates, times, and links to either join a group training session or sign up for a one-on-one.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you at our next training session on Thursday this week.